The Millionaire CEO saw two boys washing his car, and they looked exactly like him. The morning sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that blurred the horizon and dimmed everything beneath it. Carter Hayes stepped out of the Grand Bellamy Hotel, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, ready to head into another day of meetings and mergers. He moved with his usual confidence, accustomed to the quiet awe his presence inspired. In the world of luxury real estate, Carter Hayes was more than a CEO. He was a legend, billionaire, ruthless negotiator. A man so consumed by success, he'd long abandoned any pretense of personal connection. Temporarily staying at the hotel while renovations were completed on his new penthouse, Carter had little patience for distractions. So when he spotted two boys near his luxury car, crouched at the front bumper, his first instinct was annoyance. They were wiping the headlights with pieces of worn-out fabric, old t-shirts or maybe scraps from something else. Their clothes didn't fit, and their shoes were mismatched. Carter took a step forward, ready to dismiss them. Then one of them looked up, and everything stopped. The boy's eyes were a sharp green, with a flicker of gold around the edges. His grin was tilted, slightly crooked, the same expression Carter had seen in photos of himself at that age. The second boy stood beside him. Identical. It wasn't just similarity. It was as if someone had plucked Carter's childhood image from a forgotten family album and split it in two. For a man who prided himself on logic and control, this moment shattered both. "You boys, where are your parents?" he asked, his voice quiet and uneven. The taller of the two gave him a wary glance. "Ain't got any. We just clean cars to get some money." Carter stared at them, searching for something to say. Anything that would make this surreal moment make sense. "What's your name?" "I'm Josh. That's Evan." Josh and Evan. Carter felt the names settle heavily into his chest. Before he could ask anything else, the boys darted off, disappearing behind the parking garage. He didn't follow. He just stood there, stunned, as if the past had risen out of nowhere to grab him by the throat. That night, Carter made a single phone call, one he hadn't made in years. "Vincent," he said, "I need you to find out everything you can about two boys. Josh and Evan Mitchell. 7 years old, New York area. I need answers fast." Vincent Marlowe was a private investigator, discreet, expensive, and never asked unnecessary questions. But Carter already knew the truth. Deep down, he didn't need confirmation. The boys' names, their age, their faces. Only one woman could have given birth to them. April Mitchell. Years ago, she'd been a brilliant, tenacious journalist. Carter had admired her fire, the way she challenged him, refused to be impressed by his wealth. They'd shared a brief, intense relationship before his company went public. Then, overnight, everything changed. His world shifted to boardrooms, numbers, and headlines. He left without warning. One message: no calls, no closure. She never responded. 3 days later, Vincent called back. "April died 2 months ago," he said. "Car accident. She was driving the boys to school. They survived. She didn't." Carter pressed a hand to his chest. It felt like something had been knocked loose inside him. "The boys live in Queens now," Vincent added, "with a woman named Helen Ortega. She runs a sort of informal home for orphans. No legal guardianship, just compassion." Carter didn't say a word. He just ended the call. That evening, he drove to Queens himself, unrecognizable behind the wheel of a plain rental car. He parked a block away from the small, aging house and waited. From across the street, he saw a flickering kitchen light. Through the window, two small silhouettes sat side by side at a wooden table, eating from a shared bowl. No luxury, no security, just survival. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time he brought small things: bags of groceries, a tool kit to fix the leaky sink, warm jackets. He said it was a donation from a local outreach program. Helen welcomed him, cautiously at first, then with surprising warmth. The boys didn't remember him, didn't suspect. They called him Mr. Carter, a kind man who fixed broken things and sometimes stayed for dinner. But every time they smiled, Carter saw April. Every laugh echoed something buried in his memory. And every time they looked at him, he saw himself. He didn't know what to do with that truth yet. But for the first time in years, Carter Hayes, the man who built towers from nothing, was quietly building something much more fragile, something he couldn't afford to lose. The small house in Queens had a creaky porch, paint peeling in spots, and a rusted mailbox barely clinging to its post. But inside, it pulsed with a kind of quiet resilience. Mismatched furniture, second-hand bookshelves, a fridge covered in crayon drawings. It was a place held together by love and effort, not wealth. Helen Ortega, the woman running this makeshift refuge, had soft eyes and a firm voice. She had raised 3 children of her own before taking in others who had nowhere else to go. Josh and Evan weren't her first, and she doubted they'd be her last. Still, she told Carter one afternoon, "These boys, they carry a sadness like I haven't seen before. They don't talk about their mama much, but they miss her. Every night, Josh reads from a little notebook she left. I think it helps him sleep." "Sigh," Carter didn't reply. He just nodded, feeling like an intruder in lives far more grounded than his own. The boys, meanwhile, were slowly warming up to him. Evan was the quieter of the two, watchful, cautious, rarely smiling unless Josh did first. Josh, on the other hand, was bold, always the first to speak, to try, to ask questions. "You always fix stuff?" Josh asked one afternoon as Carter replaced a cracked bathroom tile. "Not always," Carter said, handing him the spare. "But I try." "Wish I could fix things," Josh mumbled, almost to himself. "You will. Just takes time." That night, Carter stayed longer than usual. Helen had made a stew with leftover vegetables and a few donated cans. The boys insisted he sit beside them. At some point, Evan quietly placed his paper cup of water in front of Carter and whispered, "So you don't have to get up." It was nothing, just a gesture, but it gutted him. Carter returned to his hotel late that night and stood staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his suite. His phone lit up with unread emails, merger offers, developer pitches, press inquiries. For the first time, he turned it off. He didn't tell his assistant. He didn't alert his team. He simply started spending his days in Queens and his nights thinking about a woman he left behind and 2 boys who had no idea they shared his blood. One weekend, Helen gave him a photo. April was holding the boys as toddlers, both of them in matching red pajamas, her hair tied back, laughing at something outside the frame. "She was so proud of them," Helen said. "She never spoke your name, but I think there was someone she wanted them to meet one day. Someone who never showed up." Carter stared at the photo for a long time. He didn't recognize the version of April in it. She looked content, whole, as if she'd found something he'd never even been looking for. "I failed her," Carter admitted. Helen's response was kind, but firm. "Then maybe you try not to fail them." So he did. He started picking the boys up from school, saying he was helping out Helen while she recovered from a cold. He sat through teacher conferences, helped with book reports, took them to the park. Sometimes, in the quiet of the living room, they would ask about his past. "Were you always rich?" Josh asked once. Carter hesitated, then replied, "No, I grew up in a small apartment. Shared a bed with my brother. Got made fun of for wearing hand-me-downs." Josh's eyes lit up. "Us too," Carter laughed, and something inside him, something buried under years of walls and silence, began to crack open. He didn't tell them the truth yet. Not about April, not about who he really was, but he knew the moment was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. It started with a question. "Why don't you ever come on weekends?" Evan asked one Thursday afternoon, as Carter helped him glue pieces of a cardboard solar system for a science project. Carter paused mid-motion. "Weekends are busy," he replied carefully. Evan didn't press. He rarely did. But the question hung in the air unanswered. Josh, less subtle, added, "You work all the time or something?" Carter gave a vague smile. "Something like that." The truth was, he was terrified of what weekends might mean, of crossing some invisible line from guest to father figure, afraid that if he gave them more, they'd start needing more. And needing someone like him had never ended well for anyone. Especially not April. But time, like guilt, doesn't wait for permission. The bond between Carter and the boys grew faster than he expected. After-school runs turned into movie nights. Grocery trips turned into weekend soccer matches. Even Helen, once cautious, began calling him for help with things she could probably manage herself. A leaky pipe, a flat tire, a school permission slip. "You know," she said one day while folding laundry, "if I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to earn a place here." Carter didn't respond. He didn't have the words. Then came the school event. Josh and Evan were selected to read a short tribute for Family Appreciation Day. Helen had already informed Carter about it, and the boys had asked if he'd be there. "You don't have to speak or anything," Josh had said. "Just be in the crowd." Carter had said yes, but that morning he didn't show. A last-minute investor meeting in Boston had pulled him away. He didn't fight it hard enough. He didn't delegate. He told himself the boys would understand. They didn't. Helen didn't say much when he arrived the next evening. Just a simple, "You missed it," as she handed him a bag of leftover cookies from the school bake sale. Inside, the boys were quiet. Not angry, worse, distant. Evan avoided eye contact. Josh barely acknowledged him. "They saved your seat," Helen said quietly. "Put your name on it with a paper star." Carter sat in his car outside the house that night for hours. He didn't drive away. He didn't go in. He just sat in silence, staring at his own reflection in the windshield. A man who built skyscrapers but couldn't keep two boys from thinking he didn't care. The next morning, he showed up early, made breakfast, French toast, burned the first 2 tries. "I'm sorry," he said without excuses. "I messed up. That's on me." Josh shrugged. Evan didn't speak, but neither left the table. Later that day, Carter stood alone in April's old room, the one Helen had turned into a small office. Most of her belongings had been packed away, but one drawer remained locked. Helen handed him the key without a word. Inside were notebooks, a few photos, one yellowed envelope, addressed only with his name. Carter. He unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably April's. A little messy, a little fast, always urgent. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't want it to be this way. I didn't know if I should ever contact you again. But if you find them, please don't walk away this time. They don't need your money. They just need someone who stays, someone who listens, someone who shows up." He read it twice, then again. His hands trembled. That night, Carter didn't return to his hotel. He sat on the floor in the boys' room while they slept, listening to their soft breathing, one of them mumbling something about dinosaurs in a dream. The next morning, he canceled 3 meetings, rescheduled a press appearance, and called his lawyer. "I want to begin the process of gaining legal guardianship," he said. The lawyer hesitated. "Are you certain?" Carter's voice didn't waver. "I've never been more certain of anything." But it wasn't just paperwork. It was lunches packed at 6 a.m. It was learning how to braid hair for Evan's school art project dummy. It was showing up, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. Still, the past didn't disappear overnight. One afternoon, as Carter pulled into the driveway with the boys after a baseball game, Evan said quietly, "You'll leave someday too, won't you?" Carter didn't rush to answer. He parked, turned around, and looked Evan in the eyes. "No, I already did that once. I'm not doing it again." Josh looked at him long and hard. "Promise?" "I do," Carter said, and meant it. The decision to pursue legal guardianship set off a quiet ripple effect. What had once been informal visits and warm moments now took on the weight of permanence. And with permanence came questions, doubts, resistance, not from the boys, but from the world around them. Helen was supportive, but cautious. "You're doing good now," she said one evening, folding towels at the kitchen table. "But parenting isn't a sprint. It's a long road. You sure you're ready to stay the course?" Carter didn't flinch. "I'm not walking away again." She nodded, but he saw it in her eyes. The fear of promises made too easily. Meanwhile, Carter's name began to draw attention. A neighbor recognized him. A teacher mentioned the resemblance between him and the boys a little too pointedly. Rumors spread. Questions surfaced at school. Who is this man? Is he related? Is he taking them away? The boys heard the whispers. Josh confronted him first. "Are you our dad?" Carter had prepared for the question, but not the moment. "Yes," he said softly. "I am." Josh looked stunned. Evan stared at the ground. "You knew this whole time?" Evan asked. Carter nodded. "I only found out recently. But when I saw you two, I knew." There was silence. And then Josh threw his arms around him, burying his face in Carter's chest. Evan didn't. He stepped back. "If you're our dad, why didn't you come sooner?" There it was, the question Carter had been dreading. "I made a mistake," Carter said honestly. "One I regret more than anything. I didn't know about you. If I had, I swear I would have been here." Evan didn't say another word that night. The next few days were tense. Evan barely spoke to him. At dinner, he asked Helen to pass the salt, even when Carter was closer. It hurt. But Carter didn't push. He showed up. He stayed. In the background, another thread was unraveling. Carter's board of directors had started asking questions. He'd been missing meetings, ignoring media appearances, delaying a high-profile development deal in Chicago. "You're distracted," his COO told him over lunch. "This isn't like you." Carter stirred his coffee. "My priorities changed." "You can't walk away from Hayes Global, Carter. You are the brand." "No," Carter said quietly. "They are." When he returned home that night, and home no longer meant the penthouse, Josh was drawing on the living room floor. Evan was watching silently from the hallway. Carter knelt beside Josh. "What are you working on?" "A comic. It's about a guy who builds tall buildings but has no friends, so he learns how to make pancakes and be funny instead." Carter laughed, then looked at Evan. "You hungry?" Evan shrugged. "I was thinking we could try making pancakes for dinner," Carter said. "But I'll need a taste tester." Josh nodded dramatically. "Evan has the best nose. He'll know if it's burnt." "Hey," Evan cracked a tiny smile. Later that night, Carter found him in April's old room, flipping through her notebook. "She talked about you sometimes," Evan said, not looking up. "Not by name, just someone she used to love who didn't stay." Carter sat on the floor beside him. "I wish I could change the past," he said. "But I can't. All I can do is be here now, if you let me." Evan hesitated, then leaned his head lightly against Carter's arm. Just once. It was enough. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday. Carter had promised the boys they'd go to the community center after school to build wooden gliders for the science fair. He left early from a client meeting, bought snacks for the ride, and even wore an old hoodie Evan had given him, saying, You look less like a boss and more like a real dad in this. But when Carter arrived at the house, something was wrong. Helen stood at the front door, arms crossed, worry etched deep into her face. "What happened?" he asked. "They're gone," she said. "Both of them." Carter's heart dropped. "Gone? What do you mean?" "After school, a woman showed up, claimed to be from Child Services, had paperwork, said the boys were being moved to a temporary home until the guardianship hearing." Carter felt the blood drain from his face. "That wasn't scheduled for another 2 weeks. There's no order for removal." "I know. I called the number she left. It's disconnected." He didn't wait. He got in his car and started making calls. His lawyer, his contacts at Family Services, even Vincent, the private investigator. Within the hour, he had answers. The woman was fake. The papers were forged. And the boys were gone. That night was a blur of flashing red tape, police reports, and Carter pacing across Helen's living room like a caged animal. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that Vincent called. "I found them. They're safe. Scared, but safe." "Where?" "An abandoned motel upstate. Looks like a small trafficking ring targeting children in low-income homes. They'd been watching the house, looking for the right moment." Carter didn't breathe until the boys were in his arms again. Josh cried. Evan didn't. He just clung to Carter's jacket and didn't let go. The FBI took over the case. The suspects were arrested. But the damage had already been done. Carter blamed himself for not protecting them, for letting them stay in a place without real security, for underestimating how fragile their world still was. That week, he pulled them from school. He bought a small house outside the city. Nothing grand, just safe. Quiet. With locks on the doors, cameras in the yard, and enough space for 2 boys to feel like the world couldn't take them again. But it wasn't just walls he was building now. He cut his work hours in half, appointed a new CEO, publicly stepped down from day-to-day operations at Hayes Global. The press called it a shocking pivot. Carter called it becoming a father. For weeks after the incident, the boys slept in sleeping bags beside his bed. Josh had nightmares. Evan flinched when the doorbell rang. Carter didn't push. He just stayed close, reading from April's notebook when they couldn't fall asleep. One night, Evan whispered, "I thought we lost you too." "You never will," Carter said, his voice cracking. And that night, for the first time, Evan called him Dad. He didn't say it like a question. He said it like a truth. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their lives changed. Carter now woke up to the sound of cereal bowls clinking, and Josh humming old cartoon themes. He packed lunches, practiced spelling words, and became surprisingly good at separating socks during laundry. But there were still aftershocks. Evan had grown quieter again. He no longer flinched at loud noises, but he watched windows, checked locks. He didn't sleep unless the hall light was on. Josh, on the other hand, seemed louder than ever, joking, dancing, trying to distract everyone from the fear he didn't quite know how to name. Carter noticed it all. Every silence, every fake laugh, every moment that reminded them, and him, how close they'd come to being taken. One afternoon, he found the boys sitting in the backyard under a tree. They weren't playing, just sitting. He crouched beside them. "Hey," he said gently, "what's going on?" Josh looked at his twin, then said, "Do bad people always come back?" Carter took a deep breath. "Sometimes they try, but we're not alone anymore, and we're stronger now." Evan asked, "But what if something bad happens again?" "Then we face it. Together." That word, together, became something of a quiet shield. It didn't erase the past, but it gave them a foundation. A new definition of home. The guardianship process moved faster after the incident. His legal team filed everything. The story made headlines, casting Carter not just as a CEO, but as a father who risked everything to protect his sons. During the court hearing, Helen testified. "He didn't walk in with money or promises," she said. "He walked in and stayed." The judge signed the papers without hesitation. That night Carter didn't celebrate. He didn't post about it. He just brought home pizza, turned on a space documentary, and let the boys stay up past bedtime. Later, as he tucked them in, Josh asked, "Does this mean we're yours now?" Carter smiled, brushing back his hair. "You've been mine since the day I saw you wiping down my car." Evan whispered, "And you're ours?" Carter looked between them and nodded. "Forever." The words hung in the room like a quiet promise. And this time, for all of them, it felt unbreakable. Carter had spent his life solving problems with money, strategy, or influence. But raising Josh and Evan demanded something entirely different: presence. There were no shortcuts for midnight fevers, spelling bee nerves, or Evan's sudden fear of thunderstorms. No corporate training had prepared him to negotiate bedtime routines or manage two different cereal preferences. But slowly, the boys changed, and so did he. One morning, while making pancakes shaped vaguely like dinosaurs, Carter realized he hadn't opened his work laptop in 3 days. The emails were piling up, but so were art projects on the fridge. One of them, a crayon drawing titled "Our Family," showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a crooked house, with hearts floating above the roof. He stood there staring at it longer than he meant to. That afternoon, he took the boys to a used bookstore. Josh immediately made a beeline for the comic rack. Evan drifted toward the nature section, fingers tracing spines with quiet care. When they checked out, the woman at the register asked, "These your sons?" Carter didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word came out natural, easy, true. Later that week, Evan asked Carter to help him build a model of the solar system for class. They spent the evening stringing foam planets across a cardboard sky. As they finished, Evan tilted his head and asked, "Was it hard, being alone before us?" Carter blinked. "Yeah, I just didn't know it. You seem better now." He didn't know what to say to that. Only that Evan was right. Carter began embracing the mess of parenting, the unpredictability, the rawness. It was in the way Josh laughed until milk came out of his nose, or how Evan liked his sandwiches cut into rectangles, not triangles. But growth wasn't just about them. Carter changed too. He sold one of his 3 vacation homes, cut down his work to a consulting role, started volunteering with a local literacy program, something April had always talked about doing. One day, while helping the boys with a school fundraiser, Carter found himself manning a hot dog stand in the school parking lot, wearing a novelty apron that read, "Grill Master Dad." It felt ridiculous. It also felt right. That night, Helen visited for dinner. "You're not the same man who first walked into my house," she said, sipping tea. "I know," Carter replied. "You were a ghost in your own life. Now you're here. Present." "I almost wasn't." Helen looked at him carefully. "But you are. That's what matters." In April's old notebook, Carter had once read a line she scribbled in the margin. "Love doesn't show up perfect. It shows up anyway." He thought of that line every time he burned breakfast or sat through a school play with 35 screaming kids. Every time he felt overwhelmed and still chose to stay. Because showing up wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of becoming something more. Becoming Dad. Spring arrived quietly, bringing with it the promise of renewal. The boys were thriving. Josh had joined the school's art club, and Evan was reading 2 grade levels above his age. Their days were filled with routines Carter never thought he'd be a part of. Early breakfasts, bike rides after homework, library visits on Saturdays. And yet something was brewing beneath the surface. It started with a letter. A certified envelope arrived at Carter's new house, addressed not to him, but to the guardians of Joshua and Evan Mitchell. He opened it slowly. Inside was a court summons. A woman named Diana Kent, April's estranged sister from another state, had filed a motion to contest custody, claiming Carter was a stranger with no verified emotional ties to the children, and that family should raise family. Carter sat in silence, the letter shaking slightly in his hand. He'd heard April mention a sister once, a woman with a history of substance abuse and an estrangement that stretched back more than a decade. But Carter hadn't thought she'd still be around, much less trying to take the boys. When he told Helen, she frowned. She was never part of their lives, not even after April passed. This feels like she's after something else. Carter knew what that something was. His name, his money. Still, the case had to be taken seriously. For the first time in months, fear crept back into the boys' world. Josh overheard a conversation and immediately assumed the worst. "Are they going to take us away?" "No," Carter said, kneeling. "Not without a fight, and not without the truth." Evan didn't speak, but that night he unpacked his old duffel bag, the one he hadn't touched since moving in. Just in case. Carter saw it, and it nearly broke him. Over the following days, he prepared. He gathered evidence. Statements from teachers, Helen, neighbors, photos, letters, report cards with his signature, drawings from the boys. That night he sat down with both of them. "We may have to go to court soon," he said gently. "Someone is trying to challenge what we have." Josh asked, "Do we have to go live with her?" "No," Carter said, "but we may need to tell people what this home means to us, what we are to each other." Evan looked up. "We're a family." Carter smiled. "Yes, and no one can take that from us." He didn't know it yet, but the fight ahead would become the final test, not of what they had, but of who they had become. The courtroom was sterile. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, a ticking clock that seemed louder than necessary. But none of that mattered. What mattered sat on either side of Carter Hayes, Josh on his left, Evan on his right. Both wore collared shirts and nervous expressions. At the front, Judge Moretti adjusted her glasses and read through a thick file of papers. Across the aisle, Diana Kent sat with her attorney, dressed sharply, her expression tight and rehearsed. She hadn't once looked at the boys. The opening arguments were mechanical. Diana's attorney emphasized her blood relation, her readiness to reconnect with her family, and how Carter was a recent presence with no long-standing emotional bond. Carter's lawyer countered with records, school involvement, healthcare documentation, character witness statements, but Carter knew no stack of papers could explain what this truly was. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about presence. Then the judge did something Carter hadn't expected. "I'd like to speak with the children," she said. "In private." Josh and Evan looked at Carter. He nodded softly. They were led into chambers. Carter sat alone, hands clasped, jaw tight. Diana looked pleased with herself. 15 minutes passed, then 20. When the boys returned, they looked calm. Evan even gave Carter a tiny smile. Judge Moretti returned not long after. "I've reviewed all submitted material," she began, her voice measured. "But today, I spoke with Josh and Evan directly. I asked them where they felt safe. I asked them who they considered family. And their answers were not rehearsed. They were heartfelt." Carter held his breath. "The petition to challenge guardianship is denied," Josh gasped. Evan whispered, "We get to stay." The judge turned to Carter. "Mr. Hayes, the court recognizes your guardianship as permanent and in the children's best interest. Thank you for choosing to show up." Tears welled in Carter's eyes. He didn't cry in boardrooms. He didn't cry when his first company collapsed. But here, in this small courtroom with 2 little boys beside him, he let go. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. a rare warmth for early spring. As they exited the building, Josh ran ahead, spinning in a circle with his arms wide. "We're officially official," Carter chuckled. Evan grabbed his hand. "You didn't leave." "Never planned to," Carter replied, tightening his grip gently. Josh shouted from a few feet ahead. "Can we get milkshakes?" Carter nodded. "Only if I get the biggest one." The boys cheered. Later that night, they celebrated in their small kitchen. Helen had baked a lopsided chocolate cake. Josh made a cardboard sign that read, "Family Forever." Evan insisted Carter wear a paper crown made from grocery bags. It was chaos. It was perfect. Just before bed, Carter found April's notebook one last time. The pages were worn now, stained by time and thumbprints and tears. But the message remained. "If you find them, please stay. They don't need a hero, just someone who won't leave." He looked across the hallway at the two-bedroom doors. One slightly ajar, soft snores spilling out. He whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Months passed, but the feeling never faded. The sense that everything had changed, and yet everything had finally clicked into place. Carter's mornings now began with cereal spills and mismatched socks, not market forecasts. His calendar had fewer boardrooms and more school events. His phone buzzed less for business deals and more for birthday party invites and parent-teacher reminders. He didn't miss the noise. Their home was still modest, a one-story house with a backyard full of weeds and dreams. The fence needed painting. The garage door creaked. But to Josh and Evan, it was a kingdom. And to Carter, it was enough. One Saturday morning, the three of them were assembling a crooked tree house. Josh was in charge of the blueprint, which he constantly changed, while Evan meticulously measured each board twice. "You're getting better at this," Josh said, holding up a bent nail with pride. Carter smiled. "I've got the best crew in town." As they hammered and sawed and laughed, Carter realized something. The silence he used to come home to had vanished. In its place was the sound of belonging. Later that evening, they curled up on the couch with popcorn and a movie. Halfway through, Josh fell asleep on Carter's arm. Evan rested his head on his shoulder and whispered, "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Carter looked at the two boys, his sons, and whispered back, "I know she would." Then Evan, barely awake, added, "I'm glad you found us." Carter swallowed the lump in his throat. "Me too, buddy." And in that quiet, ordinary moment, wrapped in a blanket, a half-finished movie flickering in the background, Carter Hayes, once the most untouchable man in Manhattan, felt the one thing he never thought he'd earn: peace. On Father's Day, Carter woke to the sound of giggles and whispering outside his door. When he opened it, Josh and Evan stood proudly holding a giant hand-painted sign. "Happy Father's Day, Carter." But this time Evan stepped forward with a handmade card and said softly but clearly, "Not Carter, Dad." Carter knelt, pulled them both into a hug and whispered, "That's the only title I'll ever need." Outside, the sun rose over their little house, casting golden light across the porch. And for the first time, Carter didn't feel like a man who had built a life. He was one. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength it takes to simply stay. Sometimes family isn't about biology. It's about the choice to love, protect, and grow together. If you've ever found hope in unexpected places or believe in second chances, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. And if Carter's journey touched your heart, let us know in the comments, or tell us your own. Because sometimes the greatest stories are the ones we choose to live. What would you have done in Carter's place?